Can I have both our speaker on the screen, please? Dr. Bodri and Dr. Niranjan Sahu, please come on the screen.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I had actually muted it.
Okay. Yes, we'll start. Yeah, Director sir, can you come on screen?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Niranjan Sahu and Dr. Jagannath. Yeah, please.
Good teacher.
Yeah, we'll start. Manoj, so we are ready with, we are going to start. Manoj. Manoj, so we are ready with the our social, yeah.
He might have muted.
You can start. Okay. Well, distinguished dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Dr. Jagannath Maulik, the coordinator of the lecture series and also moderator of today's lecture on international economic relations of the USA with India and China. First of all, on the behalf of State Bank Institute leadership, I warmly welcome our distinguished guest speakers, Dr. Badrinarayan Gopalakrishnan from University of Washington and Dr. Niranjan Sahu from Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi, and other dignitaries and participants. About today's lecture, we know that how COVID-19 has hurt the global economy, including India. It has affected everyone. It could be rich, poor, the advanced economies, emerging economies, and among the sectors, it is manufacturing and services. So we are having first discussions on this issue, starting from our first lecture, that is on Japanese business or MNC in India in the pandemic by Professor Sato from Kobe University, Japan. And then we discussed on the long-run economic growth in the pandemics in Russia by the expert from Higher School of Economics, National Research University of Moscow. Then on capacity utilization in Switzerland and India by the professor from KF Swiss Economic Institute, Switzerland, and then the expert from Reserve Bank of India, and then on the state of global economy in post-pandemic by the professor from University of Groningen, Netherlands. So in these lectures, our focus was on demand side factors as the reason for the slowdown in economic growth in India and the other countries in this pandemic. We also focused on the supply side factors, particularly how the supply chain is disrupted due to this pandemic, which was deliberated by the expert from the Institute of South Asian Studies in National University of Singapore, and then on international economic system and world ordering by Professor Danny Quah from National University of Singapore. However, besides this COVID-19, there are many other things going on in the world, such as Brexit deal, establishment of RCEP, that is regional economic comprehensive economic partnership, and changing political leadership in the most powerful countries like USA, and also shifting or relocating of the American and Japanese companies from China, then trade and tariff war of China with USA, Australia, India, and other countries. Recently, even after Brexit, the UK has formally applied to be the member of Asia Pacific, the trade bloc. Of course, some of international economic relations are also driven by the geopolitical relations. Considering this economic and geopolitical development in this lecture, we'll have a
trade.
Considering this economic and geopolitical development in this lecture, we'll have a detailed discussion by our guest speakers, Dr. Badrinarayan Gopalakrishnan, with a focus on international economic relations between USA, China, and India, and also political and strategic relations by Dr. Sahu. Friends, this is the 7th lecture of the series. For this, we are very thankful to our director, Mr. Saroj Kumar Patnaik sir, for his active support for the lecture series. The sequence of today's event as follows: the opening remarks by our director, and then followed by the presentation by both the speaker, and then we'll have questions and answer session. Before I invite our director, allow me to say a few words about him. He is General Manager and Director of SBIL. He is a law graduate from Delhi University. He has done his MBA in HR and is also a certified associate of the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. He has an illustrious career in banking about 33 years. He is having varied experience in retail and HR as well as overall exposure to the bank's training system. He had joined the SBI in 1987 as a professional officer. He has served as Chief Manager, Learning and Development, Regional Manager, Circle Development Officer, Ahmedabad Circle, and DGM and Vadodara, Ahmedabad Circle. So I request you, sir, to deliver the opening remarks. It's over to sir, director sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jagannath. It's an awesome journey. And what should I say? This is taken this. There's an echo somewhere. One has to mute his mic or something. Manoj, take it up. Yeah.
I think put everyone's mic mute except the speaker.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. At the outset, I warm welcome from SBIL to our distinguished guest, Dr. Badri Narayan and Dr. Niranjan Sahu. It's a privilege for us that you have joined our platform, and as being a panelist, you are going to take it forward, this international lecture series. This is definitely another empowering journey so far as the institute is concerned. At the same time, I welcome all the participants, those who are there. But at the outset, I must give a kudos to Dr. Jagannath. He's steadfastly during this COVID, he has taken his contacts, his relationship with knowledge partners. So across the globe, this Institute of Leadership have traveled, whether it's Japan, whether it's Russia, whether it's Switzerland, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Netherlands. We have traveled across for the relevant reasons, and we have connected with the wider spectrum of the eminent people also. And to precisely what I want, since this is an internal lecture series, what my predominant in my mind is, we are going to listen, and they are the best in the areas, in the domain. So what I want to say is how I am going to promote my institute, how I am going to place what we are meant for. In this regard, we would like to tell you about our parent organization, SBI. Regarding SBI, with a legacy of 200 years, is a leading financial service group of India. With assets of $590 billion, SBI is ranked 236th in Fortune Global 500 list of world's biggest corporations. It has 22,141 branches, including 200 plus overseas branches in 32 countries. With its 250,000 competent employees, SBI provides banking service to over 449 million customers across the globe. You check it out, 449 million customers who are dealing, and that means it is beyond so many countries' populations also. And 3/4 of the world's countries' population we can cross over this also. Training in the State Bank is proactive, planned, continuous, and integral part of organizational development. And here there is a concept of training has also been gone to that level. There are 51 state level State Bank Learning and Development Institutes spread across the country. Apart from that, there are 6 Apex Training Institutes. In this regard, the State Bank Institute of Leadership has been the new concept, new thought process of our competent authority. They have thought, and it has been constituted in 2017. The basic idea is to go for the leadership, management, banking research, but not confined to only SBI. And it has been targeted to the BFSI sector. But in this pandemic and this corona, it has gone beyond its boundary. And because of that, Dr. Jagannath has come out, the international lecture says beyond boundaries. We have been targeting so many relevant issues. If you are going to see during this pandemic, there are so many virtual webinars we have gone through. We have already crossed more than 50. Regarding that, 11 web series which we have placed in our YouTube and live streams, Facebook and all. There has been a participants of nearly more than 6 lakhs viewers for our web series. That means somewhere we are connecting our relevance with the issues, and at the same time we are placing ourselves in the right domain. In this regard, I would like to share with this the topic international economic and strategic relation of the USA with India and China. This is a very interesting thing. And the moment the discussion is going to go on, I can assure that there will be many takeaways. But at the outset, first I'll tell you, the relationship India and the USA is based on shared commitment of freedom, democratic principles, equal treatment of all citizens, human rights, and the rule of law. Now you think of whether all these things exist with China. There is a trust deficit. No rule of law is there. There is what should I say? There is no democratic processes, principles, but in the global arena, these are the existence and these are the differences or nuances. With this, we are going to exist. In this regard, first we'll talk about this. When Dr. Jagannath started, he started with the pandemic and all. But now my point is, pandemic, no pandemic. Economic, no economic or strategic relation. Whether this principle which I have shared with this, whether ultimately it is going to make a difference. So that has to be also we are expecting or something that is in our mind which we are sharing this. So far as the US and India trade relation is concerned, there is a long expected trade deal which everyone was expecting during Mr. Trump's time. It could have been signed, but till now it has yet to be materialized. Negotiation under prior administration on a bilateral investment treaty are stalled due to difference on approach on investor protection. So many other issues are also there, because so far as America and other European countries or developed countries are also having the opinion, they are critical of India as well as China on the ground that these developing countries to claim special and differential treatment under WTO rules. They think they should not be given that kind of preference. That is also one of the aspects. But having said that, so far as this trade Indo-Pacific region is concerned, India has opted out not to join RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, signed by China and 14 other countries. That is also during this in November 2020 in the midst of COVID. Still people are aligning with China so far as opening their markets to them, because India had the concern about the effects of opening its market to China's export. After this border dispute with China, India and China is having a different ballgame altogether. India has stalled its business, it has reduced its dealings with China, as well as so far as other issues are concerned, we are not in that some parallels what used to have before the dispute is concerned. Similarly, the United States withdraw from the proposed TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in 2017. And third is, India also has sought to join Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation composed of United States, China, and 19 other economies, but its willingness to make sufficient economic reforms to join is still uncertain. So these are certain things we are definitely going to learn and to think about it. But so far as the strategic relation is concerned, after the change of American presidency, definitely it was a matter of concern, will be a very strong word. It was a concern, it was an apprehensive how the new dispensation of the 46th president, Mr. Biden, is going to take it forward. But just day before yesterday, I came through the news. Indo-US to kick off major combat exercise in Rajasthan in next week. That means it is already there. Regarding Quad, there is a very interesting message has come from the National Security Advisor, Jack Sullivan. US will build on and carry forward the four-nation Quad grouping in order to develop a new strategy to counter China's aggressive behavior in the Indo-Pacific regions. At the same time, there is a very interesting thing is there is a strong message from United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Pakistan, whether with Indo-China relation, whether it will fit into it. You are the two eminent personalities you are going to share with us. Regarding the Daniel Pearl terrorists, those who have been given, what should I say, they have been taken out from the prisons. Now they have urged Pakistan with no uncertain term to explore all legal options to ensure that the killers of Pearl are brought to justice. And another very interesting point which I want to share is, in the meantime, China has launched its second most advanced warship for Pakistan Navy, which can be fitted with the nuclear arsenal also. So many things are getting to this, because for China, having Pakistan arming them so they don't have to bleed their own people. They just have to feed and to feed Pakistan to the teeth so they can take advantage of this. So this is a very interesting position. So far strategic relationship is concerned, having relationship with India, China and Pakistan, that is also going to be a game changer so far the strategic relation concerned. Another thing which I would like to share with is, after Mr. Biden has come into power, what could be the relationship with Iran? That is also going to give a lot of changes, because once the Iran embargo is going to lift, India's economic policy, the Chhabra port, which is still India wants to develop it, that is also going to take a major step so far as India economy, because the oil deal is a trade-off for barter system. India didn't have to pay in dollars. It had to through commodities, whether rice or whether other things that was there, but that has been stopped. So that aspect has also been one of the major issues, what is going to happen. So Iran and American relationship, the strategic relationship. So considering this India, China and USA, there are certain areas like Pakistan, Iran, the relationship with Taliban of USA, all these things is also going to factor in. All these things, whatever layman or whatever the general, we are going to know about it. But after listening to you, definitely will ensure that we are going to take away further more than what we are having. This much from my side. Thank you very much to eminent personality, Mr. Dr. Badrinaran and Mr. Niranjan Sahu. At least you have come to our platform. It's a privilege for us. And thank you, Dr. Jagannath. You have called these two eminent personnel to our board. So all my best, and we'll be listening very sincerely, and we'll definitely take away whatever the outcome will be there. Thank you very much. You are muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, sir, for the opening remarks. Really, your remarks have set the tone for our distinguished speakers. With this, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Badrinaran Gopalakrishnan to deliver the lecture. About him, he is an affiliate faculty member and senior economist with School of Environment and Forestry Science, University of Washington, Seattle. He co-founded Infinite Sum Modeling LLC with offices in Canada, USA, India, China, Hong Kong, and other countries. He had also served Purdue University's Center for Global Trade Analysis and fellow at ICRIER, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi. His broad expertise lies in economic analysis for business strategy and public policy, employing a variety of quantitative models with a list of publications in various international journals, books, reports, and discussion papers. He has been an independent consultant with several organizations, including the McKinsey, IMF, World Bank, UN, EU, ADB, KPMG, Harvard University, and many other organizations. He has presented his work in invited seminars in several places, including Harvard University, MIT, and across the globe in the world. Thank you, Dr. Badrinaran Gopalakrishnan, for your valuable time. So it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malik. And thank you very much, Professor Patnaik, for the nice introduction and nice inaugural address. So I'm very happy to be part of this session and share some of the findings from some of my work. I also thank Dr. Sahu for joining and adding his perspective to the discussion. So Right now we are in a very interesting situation when it comes to international economic relations. For many years, for many decades, US has been the flag bearer of free trade and open economic policies, free markets, and so on. And as we all know, China has been a communist country. Although over the past 3-4 decades, they have come up with many market reforms, and they have this combined approach. They still have the Communist Party, but they also have market-based systems. But last year, not only last year, last 4 or 5 years, we have seen a dramatic shift in this scheme of things, wherein US has become highly protectionist, and under the outgoing Trump administration, currently, basically the former president Donald Trump, and basically his approach was to increase tariffs against many countries, but particularly China, and also increase other barriers with respect to China. And China has also retaliated with the US by increasing its tariffs. And the US has also increased tariffs with other countries, including India. For example, India has lost the GSP. In India also faces very high tariffs in the US market. So in this way, US has become more protectionist than several years than it was in the past several years. And on the other hand, China is taking leadership in some of the trade agreements. And like Professor Patnaik mentioned, RCEP was the latest instance of that, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, where it was pretty much the case that China took the leadership and they set the tone for a lot of the negotiations there, and India kind of missed the bus because we could not dominate the discussion. So India had to come out of that. So when all these things are happening, one has a few questions. The first question is, it makes sense. We can understand, why all these things are happening. US has become more protectionist, and China is becoming the new leader of global trade. Not only in terms of a player like an exporter and importer, but also as a trendsetter or a rule setter, basically. So to that extent, China is emerging. So now, what is in store for India, and how India's response can be to all these developments? On this, I want to first discuss about the relationship between US and China, particularly, like I already told you about what has happened in the past few years with the Trump administration, and then I can talk a little bit about how the new administration, Biden administration, can change things a little bit, and what is happening within China. Broadly speaking, and in this context, what are the trade policies of India in the recent years, and how that can play with all these trends. Around another 5-10 minutes, I'll talk more substantively, more qualitatively, and then I'll show some numbers, some analysis that I did briefly. In terms of US, I already talked about the protectionist steps in the recent past. With the new incoming Biden administration, there have been at least 2 or 3 things that I observed recently. The first thing is they're not going to be in a hurry to mend relations with China, because currently the anti-China sentiment is not only in India, but also in US. In fact, in US, it's even bigger, and across the world, it's there. So they're not going to mess with that part of it. So that is going to stay. Maybe there may be some negotiations, some improvements in the ties and so on. But broadly speaking, China is going to be, stay. U.S.-China relations are likely to be pretty similar. If anything, I think the Biden administration may push for some of the substantive issues like intellectual property rights, enforcement in China, which is not sufficient, or currency manipulation. Some of these other things, non-trade related things, they might talk a little more. And even one interesting thing that happened on the last day of Trump administration, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, they came up with a kind of a resolution and a declaration that China has been committing genocide against Uyghurs and so on. So that particular thing was important because I was observing that for the extent of continuity between the two administrations. So the very next day, or like 2 days later, the new Secretary of State mentioned that is going to stay. We also agree with the previous administration. We may disagree with the previous administration on many things, but with respect to China, many of the things that was done, they also agree, because their current priority for the Biden administration is to fix the COVID situation, because as of now, COVID is still bad here in the US. So therefore, going to focus on that. But in that process, there's relations with China and so on. They are going to stay the same. The status quo is going to stay. But the next few years, what I imagine can happen is probably the phase one trade deal that Trump administration and China came up with last year. That might be taken up, and more negotiations might be done by Biden administration in the next couple of years, and that may lead to some improvements in the ties between US and China, and that can only happen if China agrees to some of the concerns by US about the way China operates, and that might mean also good for other countries if China can address some of these concerns. So I think that is what I think can happen with respect to US-China relations. So, but what I can take from this is broadly, US and China are continuing. They're continuing to be, they're going to keep the same trade policy in terms of higher tariffs that have been already instituted. So they're not going to go away any sooner. So that is the first thing. And secondly, also, many other countries have also been talking about trade sanctions against China, particularly the Quad countries, Quad group of countries, which includes Australia, Japan, and also India is also part of that, and there are also many other countries like Israel, UK, some of the other countries in Asia and the Americas. They're also interested in doing something like that. They're coming up with some concerted efforts to counter China, and particularly Quad countries are pretty serious about it. I think this is more a subject of Dr. Sahu because it's more strategic and military kind of engagements, but I think they also have some economic ramifications. For example, Japan and a few other countries, even Australia, some of these countries have been engaged in a lot of discussions with India, with Niti Aayog and other institutions, government institutions, to move some of their companies, their industries in China to India. So there has been some discussions along those lines. So what I'm saying is that this China vis-a-vis the rest of the world, that is broadly happening. That those tensions are happening with many countries. Of course, like Professor Patnaik mentioned, RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, make sure that at least that block of countries are going to stay friendly in an economic sense with China. So basically, RCEP is also not a huge agreement in the sense that it's not like removing all the tariffs and so on. So they also have a lot of exceptions. So all the countries have managed to protect their sensitive sectors, and the tariff reductions are not that deep. So in this way, the China vis-a-vis rest of the world is broadly something that is happening currently. So this is a global situation. Now coming to India, India has been moving to free trade, kind of relatively trade-friendly policies over the past couple of decades. But in the last decade or so, last 5 to 10 years, the trend has been kind of reversed. We have been increasing some of our tariffs in India, custom duties, and that is actually some of it is due to our focus on make in India to begin with, to make sure that the import competition is less and domestic production becomes more viable, and then Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is more about self-reliance. But in all these cases, the ultimate purpose is to attract investment. We have a lot of investment in India, and then what I imagine is that these tariffs are kind of temporary. So you keep the tariffs high so that the companies, if they want to sell to India, they cannot export from outside. They have to come in and make in India or develop the capacity in India. And once they come, once this becomes like a trend, like a long-term trend, then the tariffs can be reduced again. So this is, I'm saying this because it has happened in the past with the auto industry, for example. In Indian automobile industry, it has always had a pretty high tariff compared to many other sectors. Like I think initially it was around 200% or something. Then it came down slowly, but not a lot. Even now, if I got it correctly, it ranges between 60 and 100%, depending on which type of automobile you're talking about. So because of that, pretty much all the major global auto companies, they have a presence in India because they wanted to avoid the tariffs, so they entered India. Then they realized India has a pretty good ecosystem for producing automobiles, the mechanical engineering, graduates, human capital, and also the other allied industries are pretty widely present in India. So they started these industries and they're flourishing. Some of them, for example, Hyundai plant in Chennai, that is the largest plant of Hyundai which manufactures small cars. So basically, they came to make in India, but they are exporting to across the world. So in the same vein, when the Prime Minister talked about Atmanirbhar Bharat, I was listening to some of his speeches, for example, the Independence Day speech last year. He mentioned that Atmanirbhar Bharat is not inward, it's not inward looking, it's more outward looking. So we want to be self-reliant, but at the same time, we have to be like a hub for global manufacturing value chains and so on. So the broad vision is okay, but we have to see how, what kind of details, what kind of policies are going to happen. So the budget had some provisions, but lot has to be done. So I'm not going deeper into that, but broadly I'm saying that India also has taken an inward turn, broadly speaking, in trade policy. And so now I think I've given a broad idea of what is happening in US, China, rest of the world, and in India. And now if you put all the pieces together, you can think of two kinds of scenarios or situations in the future. One situation could be that all the countries in the world may, like not all, many countries in the world are going to penalize China. They're going to increase tariffs against China for various reasons. The reasons may be many. One is like COVID has, kind of spoiled their image. Another thing is, in general, countries are losing interest or faith or trust in global value chains. And when you talk about global value chains, you cannot ignore China. China is a big fish there. So if you don't want to rely on global value chain, you want to be more inward looking, then China will be the first casualty. So you have to target China first. So in that sense, globally, there is going to be like a tariff increase against China potentially, and China will not keep quiet if that happens. China will also increase tariffs. So that is the first possibility. The second possibility is that all the countries in the world, or many countries in the world, they can ally with each other. So like Quad is becoming Quad plus, and so on. So these groupings are going to be formed, and to a large extent, they may also kind of their target or objective can be to economically penalize China, but they may not do it directly. Instead of imposing tariffs on China, they may just improve the trading relations among themselves. And this is also something that is happening currently. Many countries are talking to each other and say, okay, let's invest in each other, let's export to each other, let's reduce our reliance on China, and so on. So this is also happening. So now these two things, I did a quick academic simple exercise, hypothetical exercise, using a global supply chain economic model. And I will show you briefly some visual results for next 5 minutes or so, and then I will close my lecture. I will close my part, and I'll come back again. I'm trying to share my window. I think. So, is my window visible, or?
It is not.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Can you see the bubbles?
Yes. Yeah. Visible.
Okay. So this is just to show the COVID situation. So there have been until like a couple of days ago, we have updated it. So we see that there have been 1.5 million deaths and 84 million confirmed cases. If you see India, it's about 1/10 of the total deaths in the world are in India, like 154,000. And in terms of confirmed cases, it's 1/8, like 10 million, 10.7 million. Whereas in US, we just stopped counting. Actually, there's so many deaths and cases. So almost 1/3 of the cases, and almost 1/3 of the deaths also. And Brazil is also pretty big. So in the initial times, China was big and others were small, and over time, this is what has happened. So definitely, COVID is a big issue. So now, going beyond COVID, so. Okay. I think there's some technical issue, not able to navigate. Yeah, I think there's some issue, but I will just talk about the results. I want to show the visual details, but I can just talk verbally. So the analysis I did was to look at two different scenarios. One, as I mentioned, all countries raise tariffs against China, and China also reciprocates. And second is where all countries reduce tariffs against each other and leave China alone. They don't do anything with China. China is just isolated, but it is not. It's not going to suffer from increased tariffs or something. So in these two scenarios, what we found was I looked at the next few years. I looked at the next 5 years. What's going to happen from 2021 to 2025, Broadly speaking, the results suggested that India is going to, India could potentially gain a little bit in both cases, even when all the countries penalize China directly by increasing tariffs against China. India can benefit from it, and India's GDP could be slightly higher than otherwise because of that scenario. And that is because of few reasons. First reason is that when countries are penalizing China, the trade is diverted away from China towards India. So countries that are importing from China, they're going to import more from India. But not only India. If you take the US-China trade war that happened a couple of years ago, I mean, that is still happening, but a couple of years ago it started. Many people expected that a lot of trade, the exports from China would go down and that would get shifted to India, exports from India. But that did not happen in a big way. It happened only to some extent. That's because the Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, even the smaller countries like Brunei and Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, many of those countries, they picked up on a lot of industries where China suffered a blow from US. Partly because China is also well connected with those countries, so many Chinese companies they could establish their presence in these countries, and Chinese countries are continuing to export from these countries, kind of like what we call as re-exports. So in that sense, India was not able to take advantage of that opportunity. In the same way, even with this situation that I discussed now, India is not able to exploit it much, but there is a small increase. I think I found something like around 0.1% increase in GDP that can come from the world penalizing China. So that is one aspect. The second scenario where there is a global cooperation. All the countries reduce tariffs against each other. They promote more free trade among themselves, and China is left out of that free trade. In this situation, what I found is that India can gain a little more. I think that was around around quarter percentage, like 0.25% increase in GDP can come in this regard. So this is the the broad economic impact that I could analyze by looking at different scenarios of how US, China, and the rest of the world China relations can pan out in the next few years. So the inference I got from this analysis is that there are two broad inferences. One is India can gain more if India can cooperate with the rest of the world by reducing tariffs and so on. Secondly, also what I found is that obviously when I say the first thing, I also mean to say that directly increasing tariffs against China may not be that beneficial for India. So it's better to cooperate with other countries rather than directly increasing tariffs against China. And currently, our trade policy is also not doing that. Indian government is not actually increasing tariffs against China. It's only doing other things like banning the apps from China, restricting FDI from China, and that also in an indirect diplomatic way. But that is not something we are talking about. I'm talking about the tariff increases. So tariff increases are not happening so far, at least not in a big way, at least not in a way that US did for China. So what I feel is like the current approach is fine, but then there is also a need for forging economic partnerships with many other countries. So if we cannot do that, then we may be we may be going through our baseline, and the baseline is going down and down now because of the COVID pandemic. We have already lost a lot of economic activities this year, and there is an expectation that we can bounce back, but that bouncing back can be sustained and strong only if we can complement that by stronger economic relationships globally. And in this context, US-India relationship is also of paramount importance. And similarly with other friendly countries like UK, Japan for sure, and Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So, for example, the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, we have good relations with all the countries there except China. So that good political diplomatic relations can then blossom into economic relations also. So we can have more liberal trade policies with respect to other RCEP countries. In that sense, we can combat the damage that we might get because of the grouping, the agglomeration effect or the grouping effect of RCEP, which is in which China could be the main beneficiary and India can lose at that cost. So that's the broad set of things I want to discuss. So just to summarize a few points, the first point is that globally there has been an increased move towards protectionism, and India is not an exception to that trend. Whereas China is taking a leadership in trade to some extent, and but then there is also, because of COVID, that situation has changed a little bit, wherein China is being not seen very favorably by many countries. In this situation, India can potentially gain by forging economic relationships across the world, particularly with US and some of the other Western countries, and also countries like Japan and Australia and so on. And rather than kind of a combative approach where we increase tariff against China. So I end my discussion for now here, and I'll answer questions present.
Thank you, Dr. Gopal Krishnan, for the interesting and insightful presentation on international economic relation of USA with India and China, and particularly sharing your research results on the estimation of the tariff model, that is how India can gain from these tariff reductions. With this, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Sahu to deliver the lecture. About him, he is a senior fellow at Observer Research Foundation, a leading think tank in New Delhi. With 19 years of expertise in governance and public policy, he now leads studies and programs on governance, democracy, electoral reform, conflict, and human rights. He is a recipient of Ford Asia Fellowship and also Sir Ratan Tata Fellow. Dr. Sahu currently serves as a member for the Carnegie Rising Democracies Network, Washington. He serves a regional democracy expert advisor to Freedom House in USA and Asia Democracy Research Network, South Korea, Seoul. He has published list of papers in international journals, books, reports, and discussion papers into his credit. His forthcoming book is on Funding India's Democracy by Routledge, London. His work on polarization in India, titled Hindu Nationalism and Rising Political Polarization in India, was recently published by the Brookings Press, USA. So thank you, Dr. Sahu, for giving your valuable time. It's over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jagannath, and Dr. Badri also illustrating the trade aspects, and I also express my gratitude to the director laying out the pathway for us to continue our discussion. I think he made a broad agenda. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So it makes my job a little more easier, but my problem is that the topic I'll be speaking is too broad, and it covers so many things, so which is not possible in a 25 half an hour kind of presentation. So I'll try to run a few slides quickly because this would at least give our participant some idea what's happening between US, India, and China. It's like a triangular kind of relations, and probably 21st century is going to be shaped by these three countries in many ways. In fact, no country, no continent in this world is not going to remain, untouched by these three powers. And whether it's trade, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's climate change, you name any initiative, including the security, I think these three countries are going to be the key players. Of course, US has been the key player for last 7 decades, and China is increasingly putting its bet. But India is also not lacking in terms of initiative and ambition. It's also catching up. So it's an interesting kind of sort of triangular relationship, and I really compliment for picking up this topic, because this is currently, in fact, it's a major discussion point in India, especially with our border clash with China since last May. So there's been, in the strategic foreign affairs circle, there's a lot of discussion on this particular aspects, especially the kind of relationship that is mushrooming between United States and India vis-a-vis China. So in this context, this discussion would add certain value. So let me run the slide. Okay. Is the presentation visible?
Yes, yeah, visible.
Okay.
It's visible, yeah.
Thanks. Okay.
You can put it in PPT mode, in PowerPoint mode. Otherwise,
it's okay now?
Yeah, okay, please continue. Yes.
Okay, thanks. So it's to run a quick snapshot of first the US-India relations. Let me start that, the relationship goes much earlier, like during the British Raj. In fact, when India was especially the Indian National Congress and many leaders were actually trying to free India from the British Raj. It was United States which gave very critical support during that time, and in fact, it's very well documented how President Roosevelt during the Second World War exerted a lot of pressure on British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to give independence to India, because this was what actually Roosevelt thought that India can be a rising power in Asia. And it, as a large country, deserves actually full independence. But Churchill resisted, of course. Post-independence, the relationship began very cordially. In fact, the John F. Kennedy administration was very keen to make India as a sort of Asia ally in the fight against the rising communism, especially the Soviet Russia and China. So in a sense, he wanted actually India to be an ally, and he was very fond of Mahatma Gandhi principles of non-violence and many things. And he was also very fond of Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister. But unfortunately, because of the Cold War settings, and in which Pakistan, which emerged as a separate country from India, became very quickly took the initiative and became very close sort of ally of United States. And of course, India's own policy of non-alignment, which was pursued largely by India and many other countries in Asia and Africa, after who actually got freedom from the colonialism. They thought that they will chart out an independent course. So that non-alignment policy actually made us actually kind of in many ways the Western power look us at very suspiciously. And that actually led to gradually, we becoming a sort of a distant kind of, nation from this Western alliance, especially UK, US, Germany, and many European countries, which became a sort of bloc against the Soviet Russia. So as I said, that our arch rival Pakistan actually tried and ensured that India remains away from the Western bloc, and Pakistan joined many of those Western security and defense sort of alliances, and our non-alignment policy in many ways actually kept us away from the Western bloc, and we were largely seen as a sort of siding with Soviet Russia, and US especially became very suspicious when we had especially the Richard Nixon became the president in the 70s. So in terms of first bilateral kind of relationship, Eisenhower was the first president to visit India in 1959, and in fact, when we had war actually in 1962 with China, and we were desperately looking for international support because China attacked suddenly, and then we were not really prepared. And that point we didn't have much sort of military strength. So Nehru actually frantically, in fact, made calls to Kennedy administration, and Kennedy, with a bit of reluctance, supplied arms, and that actually opened some kind of vista for a sort of new relationship. But then, unfortunately, India had wars with Pakistan in 65 and 71, and by then Pakistan was a very close ally of America. So that actually strained the relationship, and because US openly supported Pakistan, especially in the 1971 war over creation of Bangladesh, and that actually really for next 2 decades that actually spoiled the relationship, and it strained the US-India relationship to a great extent. And high point of worsening US-India relationship was the Washington, Peking, and Islamabad axis, which was formed in the 70s, especially when Kissinger brought a sort of China to the table, and that actually led sort of worsening of relationship with the United States. Then, after a bad phase of almost for 40 years, the real opening came after 1989 when Soviet Union collapsed and Cold War formally ended, and the Western powers, especially United States, declared that they have won the first battle against the Cold War, and people like Francis Fukuyama wrote about end of ideology, end of history, and several that ultimately the liberal ideology has won over the communism. So that was actually a time when America started looking at India in a different from a different lens, because India by then had become a successful democracy and the largest democracy in the world. So Clinton administration, especially, and that time we had Bajpayee, government, right-wing government, first time a full-fledged non-Congress government which stayed for 5 years in power. So Bajpayee and Clinton, they actually gelled very well, and then there was a beginning of kind of sort of improvement in the relationship. And that was also time when United States recognized India as a rising economic power, because we had opened our economy in the 1991, and India, with its large population, was also becoming a major sort of market. So US also was looking from that aspect. But then Pokhran nuclear test in 1998 actually created kind of a temporary hurdle, and in fact US put sanction. But then the George Bush administration in 2005 actually was quickly, it removed those sanctions and other thing, and went for a very, very transformative kind of, civil nuclear deal in 2005. And this actually laid the real path for India-US cooperation and massive transformation in the relationship. So 2005 is I would say is a kind of, sort of a defining moment, and that civil nuclear deal, because for all these decades, US never recognized India as a nuclear power, and it never allowed even any kind of enriching fuel and nuclear any kind of technology related to it. So this was actually a major sort of improvement. And then this was also the time when America had a lot of troubles also in Afghanistan, Iraq, and because of its war over terrorism, especially after 9/11 crisis. So the America was gradually, identifying that Pakistan is playing the double game, and that was the time when America thought that there is no point in actually putting all the eggs in one basket of Pakistan. So look at India in a more positive light. So that is where the relationship started building up, and especially during Vajpayee's time, he actually went further and made several kind of gesture to US in terms of increasing cooperation, democracy, because India and US together they set up several global democratic institutions like UN Democracy Fund, Communities of Democracy. So many institutions were created by India-US support. And then that was also time when US pushed India to become a member of that NSC, nuclear supplier groups. This is a very prestigious club, and India was never allowed any kind of sort of access to this. So this was also another turning point. And then this is also period that marked kind of expanding defense and security cooperation between these two countries. Modi government actually built on what actually Manmohan Singh in 10 years did, especially starting with the civil nuclear deal in 2005, in which the Manmohan Singh government had to face a major problem because the left parties opposed it, and they pulled out from the government. So government had almost come to the collapse, but it's survived. So Manmohan Singh laid a lot of actually sort of a ground for the deepening of the relationship. But Modi, when he came to power in 2014, despite Modi facing a lot of problem from the US, especially when he was the chief minister and Gujarat riots happened. So after that, US had actually put a sort of restriction on his travel to United States. But Obama administration was quick to remove that and invite him to the US. And Modi, as a pragmatic, he actually he didn't hesitate, and he went in the very fast chance. As soon as he got elected, he immediately went to the US in 2014, and he made 2 trips actually in 2014 and made several roads. So those big meetings actually in which a lot of Indian NRIs came, and all that actually created a lot of actually interest within US circle about India's rise. And Obama visited also in 2015 as chief guest of Republic Day. That was also as a sign of affirmation that relationship is really improving. And one of the as a sort of outcome of this sort of flexibility and greater trust in the relationship, US India, they signed the Defense Framework Agreement in 2015. This is a major sort of treaty, because India had never signed, and before that India was all the time telling to the world that it is following a non-alignment policy and it won't actually go with defense agreement with any power for that matter. So then India became a major defense partner, and this is a major development, because by signing that, actually United States for the first time has given this sort of kind of coveted position to a non-NATO ally. That northern treaty alliance partners who actually become US kind of core sort of allies enjoy that sort of defense support, like Japan, Korea, Philippines, many countries in Europe, they enjoy that sort of aim. So India is the only non-NATO ally to have this sort of become a defense partner of United States. And then we have actually signed several treaties, and especially with the Trump administration, he has gone aggressive and signed several things, including the COMCASA, which actually provides India technology access. All these decades, US never actually allowed India to access its most advanced, military technology. But after signing this agreement, India is able to access some of the most critical technology, which only US, shares with its allies. And that's a major improvement. And then we have Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement, BECA, which was signed during Trump administration, and this actually allows India to use even US military equipment and even fleet against any power. So in a sense, this signals that there is a massive improvement between these two countries, and I think it's unbelievable. 20 years back that one would see that US-India relationship would actually reach this stage where that India's relationship with US has become a kind of bilateral consensus between Republican and Democrats in United States. Now, coming to the China thing, the real, I would say, the elephant in the room between US and India relations, the China is actually the major factor. So US-China relationship is, I'll just run a few slides just to show how it has actually, the entire trajectory since 1950s has continued, and where does it stand today. It has largely gone, from conflict to cooperation, from cooperation to now conflict. So it started, in the 50s, basically with a stormy, kind of note. In which, when the communist revolted and captured the power in China in 1949, and Mao Zedong became the chairman, and he became the, ruler of the new country called People's Republic of China. So that was the time when US opposed that, because US was apprehensive already about the Soviet Russia, and then it saw that another rising communist country is going to be a real challenge for its dominance, and in terms of a threat to the liberalism. So US largely during that time backed the nationalists, who are fighting against this communist, Chiang Kai-shek, and who actually exiled to the Taipei, today what is called Taiwan. And in fact, US actually tried to do everything to protect the integrity and security of the Taiwan, and it continues till date. Then I think the relationship further worsened between China and US during the Korean Wars in the 1950s, in which North Korea, South Korea, they fought and the country split based on ideology, and North Korea became China's puppet and US supported South Korea. So then we had actually seen, Tibetan uprising in 1950s, late 50s, in which India became, in fact, part of it, and ultimately that led to the war. So Dalai Lama flees to India, and then US condemns the China's, sort of suppression of Tibetan, demand of becoming a separate, country and maintaining their sovereignty. And then the China's atomic test in 1964 further strengthened, because US became much more suspicious. However, there was a thaw in the frosty relationship, which largely happened in the late 60s, and that actually happened largely because of the rise of Soviet Russia. And Soviet Russia China relationship also strained during that this particular period, 60s and 70s, in which they had war, and Soviet Russia occupied some of the territory of China. So that led to a big sort of it created an opening for the US to enter, and probably in somewhere or other create a detent between these two countries, and ultimately get China to checkmate Russia. So if you look at this was the period which saw actually the relationship gradually improving. And as I said, the China and Soviet split which happened provided a kind of opening for the United States. And the baby step was, that especially Richard Nixon, who was the president, he sent his, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to, warm up with China. And especially with Mao, and then create an opening. So ultimately, first time in their entire history of 30 years, it happened that which is called ping pong diplomacy in the international relations. So a team of US diplomats and several other experts visited US, and ultimately that actually led to sort of the preparation for the future meetings. And then finally, Nixon goes to China in 1972. He spends 2 weeks, kind of in China, just to warm up with the Chinese rulers and ensure that both countries are actually together against the Soviet threats. So this became a mega event, and everywhere the journalists and press followed Kissinger, and it generated a lot of interest in, especially in America and the West. Then in 1979, US established formal relationship with China after that famous, Kissinger-led Peking, Washington, Islamabad deal happened in 1978, and US ended its official ties with, Taiwan and confirmed one China policy. This was a major sort of climb down from the US, because till then US was saying that Taiwan is a separate country, but first time it said that Taiwan would be a part of China at some point. Although Taiwan denounced, it had no alternative because it depended on US, security to survive. So the major outcome of this sort of development is that United States opened the trade relationship between these two countries open, and then China actually also started accessing not only capital, it also accessed technology, investment, and a lot of things from United States. And major benefit that China gained out of this sort of close relationship with the United States is that it gained the access with Japan. Because till then Japan had not actually opened any kind of access with China, and their relationship was very frosty after, especially the Second World War, and in which Japan was seen as a sort of aggressor. So Japan's relationship also normalized, and this was a key point of sort of benefits for China, because China massively benefited in terms of Japanese technology and investment, and in fact China's economic rise actually facilitated by Japanese investment. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, they massively invested in China mainland. Then US also allowed China's entry into WTO, and this actually allowed China to become a global economic power, because for so many years US didn't actually allow China to enter WTO. So improvement of relationship between these two countries, in many ways benefited China actually. Although strategically US benefited to keep, to corner Soviet Russia, but China really, typical going by the what Deng Xiaoping said, that we have to bide our time and hide our strength. And he basically followed these sort of policies and accept whatever US is telling, as long as they are able to benefit economically. Development in recent decades is basically, you have to see the real actually problem started since 2009, I would say. It's like, period which set a kind of, conflictual relationship between US and China. China becomes US biggest creditor, and that created a lot of problem, which my previous presenter, Dr. Badri, knows very well. So China becomes US biggest creditor, and it has purchased so much of, bonds and other thing from US, and in many ways US actually faces a lot of trouble actually because of that. And China becomes also second largest economy in 2010, and that actually also led to a lot of heart burning in US and Western, because they didn't imagine that this will happen so soon. And then what actually really created the trouble is that China also massively started expanding its military capacity, military modernization, developing infrastructure which is in many ways threatening to the neighbors, Japan, Vietnam, including India. And this actually raised a lot of suspicions, because before that China was not really bothered about these things. It was more bothered about its, economic modernization and, sort of expanding its sort of governance and other footprints. But gradually with, economic mighty, it started also expanding its, which is a logical flow. US begins much more, greater attention about China's intention over South China Sea. South China Sea is a sort of big dispute, and there are 5 to 6 countries in Southeast Asia which are claimants, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia. Several countries claim that South China Sea is actually their sort of space where they can do the navigation and exploration. But gradually China has encroached and has created even military sort of barrier there, and it has taken done pretty gone nasty with Philippines and Vietnam over South China Sea. And then there was a dispute between Philippines and China over the South China Sea, and then then Philippines won that in the international tribunal, but China actually didn't accept that, and that created a real problem, because if China won't actually accept the rule of law, then if at this point, if it becomes even bigger power, then it will actually create its own laws, and that is where actually US, Japan, even European Union, many countries including India also, they felt that China's intentions are very different, and it is not going to follow any international law, norms, and values. 2012, based on that, that is where actually America started beginning to apprehend China's intention, and then we also saw the beginning of the trade disputes, and Beijing becoming much more assertive with Japan, Vietnam, Philippines, many other countries, and that set actually the tone for next US administrations, sort of much more vocal and clear stand against China. And what you saw in last 4 years of Trump administration is basically a follow-up. And then what actually we are actually witnessing, it's sort of much more serious concern, is basically the rise of the new leader, China's President Xi Jinping. Before Xi Jinping, what we had actually is that most of the Chinese presidents actually played a very sort of I would say a subtle, unassuming, non-threatening kind of way. But once the new leader comes in 2012 and 13, he actually starts charting out China's hegemonic ambition in the regions, and you could easily see that sort of stamp is carried in BRI, that Belt Road Initiative, in which it becomes one of the largest geopolitical kind of infrastructure projects. It almost touches 5 continents, and funded largely by the Chinese state, with a clear intention of dominance, and benefits both trade and in terms of strategic advantages. And then it also created institutions like BRICS, East Asia Summit, and several other, where China wants to create alternative global institutions, so that it will set the tone like the United States did in the 40s and 50s. Then it has become very assertive over Taiwan, Hong Kong, and South China Sea. Taiwan, it has several classes, and on many occasions it has actually, hounded Taiwan politicians and journalists. Hong Kong, it is actually completely violating the agreement it has signed with UK, and imprisoning, a lot of democracy protesters. Then you have also seeing the authoritarian charms it's spreading over many countries, where actually it openly supports rogue regimes like in Cambodia, Thailand, and many part of Africa. So this is also creating a rising US anxiety, and what we also witnessed during this corona pandemic virus is also clearly you can see China's actually sort of a scant regard for the international norms and principles, by not allowing any kind of independent sort of expert to go and verify the origin of the this particular virus. And it took almost 1 year for WHO team to visit China, and they have just recently gone. So and China has not taken any kind of responsibility. Rather, it has blamed countries like United States for the spread of virus, which is which shows that it's not a responsible power. And in the final analysis, this is 2 more slides actually. Basically looking at sort of these triangular relations, US, India, and China. As I said, the hegemonic ambition of China is under President Xi Jinping is very clear. And Belt and Road Initiative is one of his actually trademark, sort of tool, in which China wants to use this sort of infrastructure projects to exert influence and create a kind of a new neo-colonialism in Asia, Africa, and entire even in part of Europe. Then we have also seen the kind of a relationship with its neighbor and over South China Sea. But the presence also, it has a growing presence in Indian Oceans, in which China wants to be a sort of dominant player, because earlier China had no presence in Indian Ocean, and India used to be one of the dominant player in Indian Ocean, but that's now increasingly changing. And real concern is actually relative decline of US, because for all these 7 decades, US has acted as a security, sort of provider, and it has actually maintained a kind of balance of power in Asia, in America, in Europe, and in many part actually through its military alliances, through its economic cooperation, and playing a larger role through its allies. But if you look at the kind of a precarious situation that we are witnessing in terms of what Japan is doing, what Philippines is doing, what Vietnam is doing, they're looking for other partners. Even what US actually has done in terms of Trump administration by pulling out from many of the global institutions and coining the word America First is a admission that it's no longer wants to be the global player that it used to be for last 70 years. It's probably more bothered about its domestic sort of compulsion. So that is actually facilitating China's easy rise and unchecked kind of growth in many ways. So you don't have a kind of US which can stop China that used to do for several decades. And then there is, of course, there is a military and economic asymmetry between China and India, because 30 years back it was a different scenario. Today, China is 5 times bigger economy than India. 30 years back they were on the same sort of almost equal. And then military power also has dramatically increased, and this is also creating a kind of regional sort of asymmetry and I would say insecurity within Indo-Pacific regions. And finally, to look at, I think confrontation and the kind of cooperation that is building up, can play to certain extent, but you can't actually straight away keep China and box it in a like a small country. It's a big power. It's a second largest economy, and it's soon probably going to be the largest economy of the world. So you can't actually just simply dismiss it and corner it, because there will be many countries which would go to China for capital, for investment, for technology. So I'm saying this is largely going to be a sort of US, China, India relationship is going to be a sort of largely a strategic triangle in which there will be a lot of interdependence, because you'll have to have cooperation on trade, on security issues, on climate change, on global governance. These 3 countries have to cooperate. There is no other way. You can't escape it. How much we actually talk about China's Atmanirbhar and all that, can we actually stop Chinese sort of business with Chinese? We have almost doing 100 billion sort of business with China. And that has grown actually exponentially in last several years. So you can cut that down for our own sustenance and growth. Similarly, US is also largest sort of with China, and almost touching 700-800 billion sort of trade. So can they actually stop that? So it won't be. So obviously there will be huge interdependence, but then conflict scenario cannot be also denied, because rise of China as a hegemonic power is bringing a lot of activities, like in terms of what you are seeing, depending defense cooperation between US and India is a classic example of that. Because much of this cooperation happening and US is more than willing to support India is largely because of China's astonishing rise, and US simply also knows that it cannot actually be the main anchor in terms of checking China. It needs allies like India and Japan, Australia, several powers in the Asia region. And then quadrilateral, that Quad thing, that democracy alliance between US, Japan, Australia and India is also a sort of a clear example. So that is also one way to contain China and check it actually, so that its ambition, its hegemony is contained to some extent. And if you today look at it, this relationship between India and China is not a zero-sum game. It's not even the chicken game or whatever you call it. It's a sort of mutual existence and sustenance. But at some point or other, one has to also figure out the strategic and security other concerns are also handled. So I see actually a sort of increasing and very, very robust relationship between US and India vis-a-vis China. But that is also not going to be in a zero-sum game mode. It is going to be, sort of confrontation and cooperation. And it's a very dynamic field. It is going to continue to change, with time. But I see the enduring kind of relationship between the United States and India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sam, for the detailed and very extensive presentation. on the international economic relation of USA with India, China, and it's also history of in the relation of USA with India, China, and including Pakistan, Afghanistan, and other countries. So already are running out of time. So there are a number of questions raised by the participants due to registration. I have summarized these questions into several blocks, and these are related to India, Asia, USA, and global economy. Let me invite Dr. Badri first to address the questions related to economics, then I will invite Dr. Sahu. Okay. So the first question, that is, as you mentioned about RCEP, also Director mentioned about RCEP. So the question that, as you know that India already you have discussed that India has opted out of RCEP because of expectation that the influx of manufacturing and electronic imports from China and dairy products from Australia and New Zealand would harm the domestic producers. Well, so what's your take on harmful effect or benefit of opting out of RCEP? So what's your views?
Thank you, Dr. Malik, and I also thank Dr. Sahu for a very insightful presentation. On the RCEP question, it's a very complex issue, but broadly speaking, in the short term, it would be a relief for India because definitely the sectors you mentioned, like many exports, many different commodities exported from China, and dairy products in particular, and some other products from Australia and New Zealand, they can flood the Indian market if RCEP was done immediately. Then that would affect the farmers and manufacturers and so on. But having said that, I also feel that this is always the case. Whenever we go with a trade deal, there is going to be, we cannot just export to countries without importing, right? So we want, like almost every country in the world, they want to be part of a trade deal because they're getting a new market to export to. But we also have to understand that all the partners also want the same. So if India wants to export to other countries, the other countries also want to export to India. So then the idea is to negotiate until the most sensitive things are taken care of. And I think that in RCEP there was a possibility to do that, but I feel like we kind of missed the bus because we did not negotiate very kind of scientifically, like showing a lot of evidence and saying that these are the sensitive sectors, these are not. We have to, and we need more access to the services trade, because services trade was not touched much in RCEP, and that was a big, difficulty for India. And these things, probably India could have taken an early leadership in RCEP and brought in a lot of this the reasons why India stepped out of RCEP, they have been very clearly articulated by the government, and they're all very genuine reasons. But the problem is that this should have been raised from the beginning and discussed, because the purpose of any trade negotiation is to work out all these differences and come up with a plan that can benefit all the countries, including India. So what I feel is, like, in the long term, in both in economic aspect and in strategic geopolitical aspect, probably India is probably going to face some losses because of not joining in RCEP. The economic reason is that we need this import competition. Like without opening up, the domestic market is not going to be efficient and productive. So currently, we have managed to protect the domestic industry from competition from China and others. But that also is going to mean that these domestic industries are going to stay inefficient and for a long time to come. So that opportunity to increase efficiency, productivity, that is lost. That is the economic reason. And that may not be a huge thing, but definitely it's something to consider. But more importantly, in geopolitical aspects and strategic aspects, India has, very unfortunately, India is not part of any major global bloc. So Trans-Pacific Partnership was the first, big trade agreement. which was actually led by US, but ironically US itself stepped down under Trump administration. Then there were many other agreements like Trans-Atlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between US and EU, and several in Asia, APEC and ASEAN plus many trade agreements. And RCEP was supposed to be the largest trade agreement with India and China both were there. The only non-WTO trade agreement where both India and China were part of. So India lost that opportunity to be part of that bloc. Being part of a trading bloc would have given India access to a lot of information exchange and also collaboration within the bloc, which is important for India's trade relations also. So I think that way it's bad. So what I would say is like I have done different studies on this, and some studies I focus on the short-term implications, and they are definitely joining RCEP immediately would have a negative impact immediately, but in the longer term, RCEP would have been positive for India. So from a visionary point of view, we could have joined RCEP by taking into account the losers. Some people are going to lose. So the critical thing of any trade agreement, the success of any trade agreement lies with how you protect the losers. If we know some people are going to lose, how are you going to support them? How are you going to rehabilitate them? So that if that part was done, it would have been great. So that's my take about RCEP. So hope that was clear.
Yeah, thank you. Now the question on the Chinese e-currency. That is, that China is bringing new e-currency, that is digital yuan. So how do you think it will affect their competitiveness? And also, do you think it will affect the economy of USA and India and the world economies? What's your take on that, on e-currency?
Yeah, a very nice question, and it's a very relevant development. I've been following that as well. There are a few aspects here. One is the success of this digital currency, even within China, which is it's already happening. Chinese are following it anyway. They're all using it, particularly Chinese exporters. The success, and then it's going to be propagated to other countries. So the success of it is directly going to affect dollar. So dollar as a globally used currency might be affected because of this. So that is one big issue for the whole world, particularly for the US. Second aspect is that it's a smart way to kind of subsidize the exporters, because under WTO you cannot have a lot of export subsidies. Actually, India has been a major, both India and China have been violating a lot of export subsidies, and recently India has been under fire. Like US has sanctioned a lot against India about textile industry, pharmaceutical industry, electronics industry, about subsidies. So now this is a smart way of subsidizing, because through the digital currency, based on the control that the Chinese government has on the currency, they can subsidize the exporters. So that is another aspect. And the third aspect is also like a genuine boost to competitiveness, because the transactions are going to be way easier and more transparent. So in that sense, the corruption and inefficiencies in trade facilitation, those aspects may go away. So it is going to be much easier to trade with China because of this. So I think these three are the broad implications of the Chinese digital currency, sovereign digital currency. And I think probably India has taken cognizance of that. And right now, currently, just 2 days ago, I saw that a bill on cryptocurrency regulation, ban and regulation has been introduced in the parliament for the current budget session. So I'm yet to see the details, but from a broad review, I feel like they're trying to, like RBI might do something similar. India may have a digital sovereign currency, and in India might also ban the other currencies, including the Chinese digital sovereign currency. So I think maybe India is taking some step in this direction, and US is also considering this very seriously. And so yeah, this is a very important aspect of this triangular relationship and also the whole world.
Well. So there is a question on shifting of farms from China to the other countries. Also, you also mentioned in your presentation that it is so how India is successful in attracting these farms into its territory, into India, and what India can do to attract these farms from China into India.
I think there are a few different issues here. The first thing is, of course, recently India has climbed up in the rankings in terms of doing business indicators and so on, investment climate and so on. But in many instances, we don't see that in the ground reality, because there are some of the new reforms like GST and also implementation of many of the investment friendly policies and so on. They have not been complete, basically. So GST in many cases has been a hassle for many small and medium enterprises, and even for the larger companies also. The compliance has been an issue, but I think by now that is not a major issue. I think particularly larger companies are getting accustomed to that, but the smaller and medium enterprises are going to still be affected. But definitely, another thing is certainty of regulations, stability of regulations and so on, and law and order situation where one major thing, like even a lot of NRIs who live here and people who live abroad, many of them, when we talk about going back to India, one thing many people worry about is about the implementation of law and order regulations and so on. So we have very good system. Like India has one of the best legal systems, frameworks, policy systems, and so on. But when it comes to implementation, for example, property rights enforcement, and so on, there are a lot of difficulties. And also with respect to the tax policies, there are a lot of these retrospective taxes and so on, which affected a lot of foreign direct investment. So if you take all these things together, investment policy, tax policy, regulations, and property rights enforcement, law and order enforcement, and all these things, these things are still not that conducive for many foreign companies to come here. This is one aspect. Another aspect is R&D. So India is still, a lot of us think that when we think of China, we think of cheap exports, and we think of labor that is not well treated and exploited and so on. But this is history. This is like the 80s or 90s China. Today's China is highly innovative. They have their R&D is it's not second to any major developed country. They have so much investments and expenditures on R&D, and they have very specialized high-tech manufacturing and so on. So we are actually talking about some country that is highly advanced, and replacing that is not that easy. Like Dr. Sahu also mentioned, it's not a kind of a zero-sum game to begin with. Like we have to learn to live with each other. We are big countries, but even otherwise, even if you want to get into zero-sum and if you want to replace China, we are not in a position to do that because R&D expenditure is really low. Innovation and research is low, particularly applied research. I mean, we may be doing some fundamental research. Even there, we're not that leading. But when it comes to applied research that can be directly implemented in the industry, that is also lagging. And there are other things, some reforms that are happening now. Last year, some of the reforms that are introduced, hopefully they may improve the situation when it comes to labor and food sector and so on. But when it comes to why, like these are all the reasons why we are not able to attract so much investment away from China here. But having said all this, I don't want to look too pessimistic. Things are improving, and we do see, for example, some of the Apple smartphones, some of the electronic companies, they have been relocating to India to a large extent. And some of these things are happening. But I think we have to be much more proactive, both in terms of developing our fundamental aspects. Like we have to grow a lot as an industry, both in, I'm not only saying that it's the government that has to do, even industries also have to change their mindset. They have to become more R&D intensive and innovative and so on. They have to make use of a lot of challenges we are facing today with COVID and come up with innovative solutions, and that way they can progress. I think that has to be there. And the government also has to come up with steps to foster that, incentives for R&D and some of these reforms that are to be implemented. And a lot of policies are on paper, but they have to be implemented properly on the ground. And some of the reforms that have been introduced, they also have to be implemented properly, and there should be more communication between the government and people and industries. So I think if all these things are done, then we may be able to attract more investment from other countries. So I think particularly from China. So but one big positive thing is that like Dr. Sao mentioned, India is a democracy, and for many countries, if like forgetting about business and economy, if they want to choose between India and China, many countries, many people across the world, they like India better than China, because India is a democracy. It's more transparent, and it's more kind of predictable, reliable, and so on, compared to China. So that image is still there, and many people, when I talk to American industrialists, for example, they really get frustrated. They say, "Oh, we really want to go to India, but India is not friendly enough for us. We want to go there, but it's not there yet." So I think once we fix all these policy issues and if the industry also cooperates, then we can attract a lot more investment. We have huge potential compared to the small countries in Southeast Asia. We have much bigger potential to attract investments.
Thank you for the answer, the response. So now there is a question on the changing administration in USA. That is the question that what kind of changes that we may expect with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as new team of US administration, whose campaigns are America United and America is Back. Specifically, how trade and business are going to be affected and which sectors are going to be affected most in India. So what's your take on this one?
Yeah, right. I think one major thing is again, Dr. Sao mentioned, over time, the US-India partnership has become almost bipartisan. So irrespective of which party is in the power in both countries, the US-India partnership is going to stay because of the democratic values and because of other shared prosperity related aspects. So now with Biden administration, as probably most of us may agree, Trump administration had a lot of pitfalls, a lot of, for example, policy uncertainty. Even in terms of international trade, there was a lot of uncertainty. In fact, we would, among ourselves, we would joke here that if you want to understand US policy, we should just follow the tweets of the president. So it was so volatile. Like every time we get something, and every day we get some new development. So I think from that, now we are moving to a more mature kind of leadership, which plans things ahead of time and so on. And like I mentioned earlier, there may not be dramatic shifts in some of the trade-related aspects. For example, I don't anticipate the reinstating of India, the tariffs that were increased against India by US. Probably even Biden administration may not bring it down immediately because there is it is actually a bipartisan thing. Although Trump was the one who did it, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, agree that the domestic industry in the US has been doing so badly. Their employment levels are so low, and they are actually predicting to catch up in 2-3 years. Like to go back to the level of employment US had pre-COVID, it's going to take 2-3 years. So given that, they do not want to do anything that jeopardizes the domestic industry and employment. So I think in terms of trade, we may not see a lot of reversals from Trump, what Trump did. But in terms of other things, like for example, climate, President Biden has already announced U.S. coming back to Paris Accord. So there can be a lot of collaborations between U.S. and India in the area of environment, climate change, and those kind of areas. And also with respect to COVID, also they have a much better, much more clear vision and plan. And there also again, U.S. and India can partner. Maybe India and U.S. can strike a deal where some of the vaccines from India can be also exported here. Because India is exporting vaccine to many countries now, but US also can be one place, and some of the other equipment, PPE and so on, also India has been providing a lot to US, and that trade can continue. That is particularly COVID related. With respect to China, I think Biden is continuing to be stiff against China, and that is probably to some extent that can benefit India. So some of us thought that as soon as Biden comes, he's going to remove all the increased tariffs, and that I think that is not happening. So India has some more window of time to whatever I said earlier to the previous question, to prepare the domestic industry, come up with more reforms and improve the situation, the law and order, property rights enforcement, and so on, so that India can attract some investment here and also some exports to the US. So I think, and you are talking about tech sectors. I think tech sector, technology, IT industry, I would say they have been prospering despite Trump, basically. So Trump did a lot of things to jeopardize the IT labor force, for example, in the US, the migrants who come here, even to some extent the outsourcing in India. Now the Biden administration has already talked about easing the immigration restrictions. So to that extent, I think the Indian immigrants who come to the IT industry in the US, now the flow can be renewed, because last 2 years, people are worried that maybe this whole Indians coming to US is going to stop because of the restrictions. But now those restrictions may maybe ease in. And then and also there could be more IT exports from India. So given that we are used to the COVID situation, working remotely across the world, maybe India can also develop the domestic IT industry to export to US. So IT industry could be a big deal. And also an important issue that Dr. Saha also mentioned is about the military cooperation between the two countries. And in this regard, there could be potential for some of the US companies, US defense companies to also enter India. There could be some probably Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat kind of initiatives which can attract some of the US companies into India. And that can happen more with the current Biden administration, even more compared to the Trump administration, because these are more, the current administration is more global in outlook, so they can accommodate such things. So and at the end of the day, one thing that the US trade representative, the current US trade representative, Ms. Catherine Tai, she mentioned that we want trade that works for everyone. Trade has to work for the middle class and for all Americans, not only for the rich few. That is a profound statement, and that also kind of reflects on a trade policy that is probably going to be somewhat different from Trump administration policy. There will be some continuity and then some deviation, but also quite different from the Obama administration policies, where Obama administration was very pro-free trade. They tried to open up with many countries, whereas I think Biden administration is going to be a little more cautious. So it's not going to be as protectionist as Trump, but it's also not going to be as open as Obama. So it's going to be somewhere in between, I feel like, based on the public statements. And in that regard, I think India may not expect a lot of leeway or a lot of concessions in terms of trade policy from US, but it can expect other kind of cooperation, like migration and investment attraction and those kind of things. So, but in terms of trade, India has to assume that the tariffs are going to continue, basically, whatever tariffs that US has imposed. So that's the broad explanation I have.
Yeah, thank you. So let me invite Dr. Saul, please give your views on the same questions and also add the political perspective to it with your views on how will the Indo-US economic ties prosper in new political scenario in general and specific to China and Pakistan.
You mean to say the new administration?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I think Dr. Badri illustrated very well, in terms of trade, economy, cooperation. I think in terms of political and strategic cooperation, you can easily see, there have been strong sort of foundation has been laid by Bush administration, followed by Obama, and then, of course, Trump administration, which actually took to much greater height in terms of defense cooperation and security cooperation between two countries. And Biden administration, Joe Biden has been one of the staunch supporter of closer U.S.-India relationship. In fact, he's one of those earliest, backer of the Indo-U.S. nuclear deal. And he's the one also who played an instrumental role in India's entry into NSG. So in a sense, if this man is actually did so much actually even as vice president, Obama's vice president, to push this relationship forward. As president, obviously he's going to push this further. And in terms of China and Pakistan, I think if you look at for last I think a decade development, China and Pakistan relationship have actually been largely in terms of looking at to basically China has been using Pakistan to keep India stuck in the South Asia, so that India's global ambition, India's ambition to play a major role in Asia, Indo-Pacific is limited because so in a sense China has so far successfully done that, but with increasing kind of sort of cooperation happening between US and several other powers like Australia, Japan, they're wanting India to play a much bigger role. And then the way actually the narrative changing in the region, especially US is ready to go to any extent. In fact, if you look at the kind of support US extended during this ongoing border clashes with China, and US has been very closely sharing intelligence and many other things with India in terms of what's happening in fact across the border. So that shows that it's very clear that China and Pakistan in many way would actually face international isolation. Pakistan has been facing for several years actually, especially after the thing that it did in Afghanistan and the way US actually got angered. And you have almost a relationship between China and US and Pakistan is very badly frayed. And with this particular, this incident of, this journalist Daniel Paul's killing, and, then the way Pakistan courts have been allowed to give this criminal actually a free sort of a ride is going to further actually strain the relationship. So I see actually increasing cooperation, and China and Pakistan's their cooperation closeness is also going to grow further, because in many ways both the countries are actually they need it actually badly, because their end game is basically to keep India limited to the South Asia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything? Any other question?
Yeah, we have exceeded time for 23 minutes.
Okay.
So there are a lot of interesting questions. Mm-hmm. So I think we should stop here. So. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Badri and Dr. Saul, for making the inciting presentation and responding all the questions very well. I hope our participants are satisfied. With this, I request our director, sir, to give any remarks. It's over to you, sir. Yeah, director, sir, are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really something which we wanted to have, and I must congratulate Dr. Jagannath to bring these two eminent personalities. And I hope they are comfortable, and the way it has come forward, it is really something SBI is always, what should I say, to place it on record, our deep appreciation, and we really feel. But before winding up, just one thing I would like to say, whether obtaining of S-400 missiles from Russia is going to have any issue with America in the future, to Dr. Niranjan Sahu.
It is. I mean, US has very strongly objected to this. In fact, Trump administration, was actually trying to scuttle it because they see, this is becoming a major hindrance between the US and India greater cooperation in terms of defense and security. And since US has already given that. Sort of defense partner treaty with India, and India has become its key defense partner. So in a sense, if then India actually buys this thing from the Russia, so that in many way actually delegitimizes that sort of cooperation. And US obviously also intends to capture the large part of the defense market in India, because India is one of the largest. After China, importer of defense and arm ammunition from all over the way, and Russia is one of our almost 70% of our imports are from Russia. So in a sense, this is going to be a major. But I think the way relationship is flowing, I don't see any sanction. But obviously, there will be pressure actually on India.
Yeah, that pressure can be understood, because a sovereign nation always will first think of its own interest. After that, will take care of this. But having said this, that is going to. And to Dr. Badri, one thing I would like to tell you, regarding RCEP signed by China with 14 other countries. Here, two major countries of our Quad, Japan and Australia, they are within the 14 countries. Even if India is having a reservation, of course, Japan and Australia also having strong reservation, but still they prefer to go ahead with RCEP.
Yeah, definitely, that is true. And in fact, I feel like the geopolitical reason was not a major consideration for this decision, because if that was only, that it just happened that it was just happened in a timely way. But if the geopolitical tension was not there, even if it was not there, probably they would have withdrawn, because this back and forth on whether India should join RCEP or not has been happening for the past 4 or 5 years. In the beginning, India was very positive, but then in the last 4 or 5 years, they had this. With respect to Australia and Japan, what they managed to do is they have. These countries are already pretty open. This RCEP doesn't make a huge difference for them, because their tariffs are already low, even with respect to China. Although with China they have other kinds of differences. In economic terms, in trade terms, they're already open. So in fact, most of the countries in RCEP, they're looking to approach the Indian market, because India is among the most closed countries among all the potential RCEP members. So India was kind of, in fact, the one paper that we wrote recently, we actually highlighted that without India, RCEP is not a big deal, because all the countries, they already have pretty low tariffs against each other. So with RCEP, they did not achieve much. They have, like, for example, Australia has certain agricultural sectors like dairy and so on, which they are highly sensitive. Japan has like rice, wheat, and certain grain sectors highly sensitive. So those sectors, they are not reducing tariffs. They're reducing tariffs for other sectors, and they're already low. Like in many cases, they're reducing tariffs from 2% to 1%, something like that, like very, very small changes. So in that sense, it's easier for them. For India, it's much more difficult, because we are among the highly protected countries in the list, and our tariff cuts were much bigger compared to others. And that's why I was telling that in the short term, it was not a great idea, because we would have suddenly saw a huge insurge of imports. But like always, it always happens in trade. Whenever you open up, you're going to see a lot of imports, but in return, you're getting some export access, market access. And more importantly, you have to train the domestic industry to face this competition. If you keep them insulated for too long, we are going back to the infant industry argument, which is a very old one. and the industry is not that infant now. So I think the short answer to your question is, the main reason is that the other countries RCEP actually doesn't make so much difference. For India, it makes a huge difference. So that's why India did not join while they joined.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Badri Narayan. Thank you, Dr. Niranjan Sahu. You have added value to the entire process of the International Lecture Series. And this concept of beyond boundaries, and the credit goes to Dr. Jagannath. Time and again, he has ensured how we are going to connect. And my request to two of you, whenever you visit India and to Kolkata, you will be our guest in SBL. You can see the way the efforts which have been done so far, academy as well as otherwise, also infrastructure-wise. It would be a privilege for us to have interaction with you and to welcome you in our campus. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely we'll visit you next time.
We look forward to.
Thank you, sir, for the remarks. With this, kindly allow me to propose the vote of thanks. I take this opportunity to give a big thanks to Speaker Dr. Badri Narayan Gopalakrishnan for the detailed deliberation on international economic relation of USA with India and China, and thank you, Dr. Sahu, for presenting a detailed history of USA relation with India, China, and Pakistan, Afghanistan. And thank you, Director Sir, for the opening remarks. Really, you have set the tone for the lecture. And thank to our participants for making the event and lecture series a huge success. And there are many other officials who are working for the successful conduct and arrangement of the event, including DGM admin, IT, and marketing departments, and broadcasting teams. Thank each of you. Also, I thank the SBL members being present here today. With this, let me announce that hope to see you all in our forthcoming event of the series, International Mobility and Poverty and Banking, on 17th of this month by Professor Stephen Dolloff from University of Chicago, USA, and Professor Stephen Kloner from University of Heidelberg, Germany. So thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.